Just first like to get your take on the inauguration and then what it means for the president not giving a speech on such an important day.
Well, let's hope that he's saving his speech for the next holiday, which is the 12th of June, where I believe that all the diplomats and everybody else will be present to be able to launch the Democracy Day, or how it is. But it's quite disappointing that at least after these elections that we have not heard from the president on how he's going to view the direction of the country in the next 4 years, because there are enormous challenges, especially when it comes to the economy.
Yeah, because I'm going to get into that, because I look at the next 4 years, I look at all the challenges that are in there. I'm trying to imagine what it means and how we need to get things running, you know, to make sure that we at least overcome some of the challenges that we foresee in the next 4 years.
Definitely, and one of the most important issues now is the insecurity in the country. The insecurity apparently has actually spread to the president's home state of Katsina. You understand that the Durban celebrations for the end of the Ramadan festival is being cancelled because of security challenges. The swearing was very low-key. So this security problem is spreading across the northern parts of Nigeria, and I think that is something that we need to address very quickly.
All right, let's look at the major document the government is trying to use to solve some of these challenges. We're looking at the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. We've seen the targets in there. We're targeting 77% growth by 2020, but that's not so achievable right now.
Well, unfortunately, I think that is really where the reality sinks in. The government, unfortunately, this government actually went into a self-induced recession. And at that point in time, confrontations with the JP Morgan bond index led to the withdrawal of people in confidence. The delay of setting up the cabinet then pushed the country into recession. And this economic recovery growth plan was supposed to be a plan by the government to take the country out of recession into a high growth trajectory. And as you've said, that budget or that document says that they're looking to achieve 7% growth by next year. But unfortunately, we both know now that that is impossible because despite the fact that we achieved 2.4% growth fourth quarter last year, first quarter GDP this year was only 2%. So to be able to pull that off in the next 1 year will take a lot of doing. And even both the IMF and the World Bank forecasts and the market analysts don't believe that we should be able to push this economy to 7% by next year.
All right, now let's look at some of the broad objectives of the ERGP still, because one of the key pillars is, you know, restoring growth. We've seen how far they've gone on that one, not too good. We're looking at also investing in people. I'd like you to, you know, when you look at first the budget and how, you know, we saw the budget pass already just a few days ago, and looking at how things are shaping up on that budget, do you think we can do much in investing in people?
It's very difficult because there's actually a disconnect already, because even this budget that was passed, you understand that an additional 100 billion was put on top of that budget. And the question of our ability to finance this budget, I think, is still in doubt. We still don't know how we're going to finance this budget because we've been running a deficit for the last 4 years, and it's going to continue the long term. As you know, we're using 60% of our revenues to service debt. And from that same Article 4 report from the IMF, which came out earlier this year, clearly that is not a sustainable pathway. So there are a lot of structural issues that government needs to address in terms of its finances to start with, and the issues in terms of balancing the monetary policy to meet the fiscal policy objectives are quite critical. So the government really needs to press the reset button. And I think it's important to see the quality of the cabinet members that this government is going to put to be ministers, because right now there is a lot of work to do and there's urgent action, because if care is not taken, Nigeria could yet again slip into another recession.
So looking at the next 4 years now, you see, we know the president is not going to seek re-election, you know, so now I think this gives him, you know, the courage to take some of those bold reforms we're looking at. Do you see any of this happening?
Well, it's the question is that when you take a look at the perspective and you say this is the economic recovery growth plan, and you see the plan they're giving to us, and clearly that plan is not working. So they need to hit the reset button. So what we'll be looking for is not only for the government to take that document, reset it, but bring in new people that would probably deliver over the next 4 years and reset that document to be more realistic. If we could see that, then you could restore confidence into the financial markets and the economic system. But also, one of the biggest problems also we've had is that if you see the stock market or the foreign direct portfolio investors, the FDIs, is at an all-time low, at about $2 billion from as high as about $9 billion. So we're suffering in that perspective. The portfolio investors are also moving out of the markets in record numbers. So these are the things that the perception of Nigeria with the international investment community is very poor. We've had issues with MTN, which again is recurring recently with all their listing and the investigations. We thought that was subdued. You've had the challenges with JP Morgan Chase and coming out of that bond index. And you've had issues with companies like Procter & Gamble, who had invested close to $300 million and all of a sudden shutting down a plant and moving out. The perception, I think, needs to be changed. We need to change our story so that people know that we are business friendly and, you know, our ease of doing business issues, we need to try to get a grip of that. So there's a lot of work to be done on all fronts, not only on the perception side, but also on the technical side in terms of monetary and fiscal policy and getting the right people that will inspire the confidence to be able to drive the growth.
All right, then looking at trying to shape our economy to a global competitive economy, you know, it's one of the pillars of the ERGP as well. But then I'd like to look at what's happening across the rest of the continent. You look at you know, countries coming together to be a part of the AFCFTA, and then Nigeria is still sitting out on that one. You know, how quickly does Nigeria need to get on this train, you know, in order to ensure that we don't get left behind?
Well, unfortunately, Nigeria should have been the one driving this train and, you know, taking the lead in terms of, but that has not been the case. Again, that is another issue that we need to redress with a new strategy going forward, to understand that this African integration with the economies of Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt coming together to be able to drive the economy, and now emerging Ethiopia, if we could get together within that framework, that's also something that is positive we need to drive. We've been very successful with that in the ECOWAS sub-region. So we need to be able to share that experience and take it to the African continent.
All right, but let's look at this, the cabinet, which is one of the crucial things that we need. In fact, it's going to set the tone for what the next 4 years will look at, selecting the cabinet. I'd like first to look at the process in Nigeria, you know, in getting this running. Less than 2 months, because when you look at even if he names the people tomorrow, they will still need to go through a screening process by the Senate, and that's still going to take quite a while.
Yes, and of course, because the Senate itself needs to be sworn in at a later point in time. So yes, there are perceived delays, but since he's returning, I think he should have in mind to be able to name his cabinet in advance to be able to inspire that confidence. So what is now left is just the confirmation hearings by the Senate. So if you've agreed to put your cabinet on the table, then at least people can begin to see the direction you're going in advance of Senate confirmation. So people can begin to see the sort of cabinet you've put together, and you do not want the delay from the last term, where it took about 6-7 months to do that. That does not inspire confidence. So I think the earlier this is done, and not only should they announce the ministers, but they should also announce their portfolios. Because we have this sort of political game we play in this country whereby ministers are announced, but you don't announce the portfolios. So there's a guessing game as to who is going to get what portfolio. And I think it's more important because trade and investment is very important. Finance is very important. Infrastructure is very important. And it's important that I would advise they need to break up that ministry, you know, power, housing, and works. You need to separate those three ministries, get capable people to be able to drive. Because, you know, in Nigeria, the talent pool and the human capital resources is extreme. For each ministerial position, I'm sure we have at least 300 Nigerians who are very qualified to be able to run those positions. So getting the human capital that is properly qualified is not the problem.
Right, but they also have to use the federal character principle to select them as well.
Yes, definitely.
All right, but still on this, I'd like to get into how the government, the executive arm of government is working with the legislative arm of government. We understand that the wranglings between both parties kind of led to some delays in a lot of processes, budgeting, for example, and all of that. Looking at the next 4 years, and when you look at the results from the elections and how the Senate is now shaped with the ruling party taking more or less a majority seat in the Senate, do you think we're going to see less of that going forward in the next 4 years?
Well, we need to be very careful with this new assembly because the ruling party of the All Progressive Congress, or that won the elections, is actually a fractured party, and there are several fractions within that party, and a fraction of that party could easily go and work with the opposition People's Democratic Party to be able to form a majority, to be able to change things or get things their way. So the legislative process is a different process from the executive process. It crosses party lines. So depending on the issues as to who is going to be Senate President, what the budget would be like, there could be a lot of bipartisan or non-partisan alliances that could be formed to get things through. So because you have the majority, it doesn't really mean that that process will be smooth. And that is something that's very important that the president needs to manage, so that all the bills that he might need to pass to be able to stimulate growth in the economy, create employment, and all those other things should be passed in a bipartisan manner. And I think it's important that you have a good liaison to be able to get things smoothly. You also inspire confidence when a president shows that he's able to work with his legislators to be able to pass bills that could grow the economy. Like the PIB, for instance, we have significant investment in the oil and gas industries that cannot come in because there is no transparency in that bill. We need to fix that bill, get it up and running, so that investments can begin to flow into that sector.
All right, but I want us to look into some of the long-standing national issues we've had in Nigeria going forward. Two key ones that I want us to touch on. Because let's see, first looking at the last 4 years of this administration, and then projecting into the future and see how much you think we can move the needle on these two issues. One of them is restructuring. Depending on who you ask, people have different definitions of what they feel restructuring should be in Nigeria. And then the second one is, the issue around subsidies, fuel subsidies, because we've all talked about how important it is to, if government shouldn't be subsidizing, consumption and all of that. But I'd like to get your thoughts on these two issues.
Let's start with the subsidy first. I think that's the easiest part of it. I mean, clearly, if government is spending 60% of its revenues to service debt, that is clearly unsustainable. The president has won a second term. He's not going to seek re-election. As you said earlier, maybe now is a time whereby he'll find the courage to be able to normalize things, because there is no political pressure for re-election and things like that. And he needs to be able to make sure he gets the right things. Clearly, we cannot afford subsidies in our economy because it's counterproductive and it's going into the wrong pockets. And it's stalling growth, as we can see. So clearly, subsidies in that sort of fuel subsidy is not really the best. If you're going to subsidize anything, then subsidize productive activity by giving corporations the opportunities to maybe tax breaks to invest and create jobs, which is what we need. Unemployment is about 35%. So if any subsidies are coming in, it should come in an area whereby it can create a stimulus into this economy. The fuel subsidy doesn't provide any stimulus. So that's number one, and we need to get rid of that. And I think reality is now beginning to set in, because we have no more choice. There's no more room, there's no more headroom, and government doesn't have any revenue. The issue of restructuring you've talked about, I think, is very important in Nigeria. I think what has happened is the fact that we have also a fractured country today, whereby people are not feeling included in the process. And it's important that we sit down, maybe within a conference, as I've said, to be able to address these issues, to understand exactly what we need to do. And I think that if we do not provide, we need to provide that platform for people to vent. And I think that when people vent in a conducive atmosphere, then we can agree to disagree in a positive direction, and I think that something positive can come out of it. But if that process is being denied, then you feel that resentment begins to build up. And I think sooner or later, the government needs to address this issue and let people have this discussion openly.